Welcome everybody to the ABCs of Clinical Research. I am Gary Freeman and I have 30 years experience in the clinical industry, having worked both in drugs and devices, in pharmaceutical companies, device companies, and CROs. This course was prepared with the administrative staff in mind for any newcomers to the industry to review the basics of clinical research. There are not a lot of good programs out there to educate people as to what we're getting involved in. Those programs are increasing as the days go on, but there's still a large number of folks that come into our industry not really knowing what we do. So we're going to review the basics of clinical research, and we're going to highlight the important role that every member of the team has in this process, no matter what your title might be. We want to make you all more productive team players, because a solid team works best for what we do in this industry. And I hope that with the knowledge that you gain today, that you'll become a more important part of your team, start to ask more questions of them, and have more input into what's going on in the organization. At every level, this is a critical piece. A lot of times the newcomer brings more new ideas that are very helpful and time savers to the industry. It's not always, we've always done it this way, this is what we do. So we want to become a more effective team overall. So let's get started. The objectives are going to be on your screen. I really encourage you to chat to all participants. That's a major piece of this particular seminar, is ask questions. I'm assuming you don't know a lot of these things, and so if there's acronyms that are given, there are a lot of them. There are a lot of abbreviations. Don't hesitate to ask. Hold up, tell me what that is, because if you don't know, someone else may not either. So I really want to make it interactive. I'll be watching that panel and encouraging you to ask questions. Our learning objectives fill up this whole slide today. First of all, we're going to recognize the importance of a knowledgeable clinical support staff. It's extremely important that we have knowledgeable people at all levels of the spectrum in the team. We want to define the common terms that are used in the field of drug and device research. If you could give me a quick chat, do you work in drugs, do you work in devices, or do you work in both? Thanks, Renee, on devices. And drugs for Cecilia. And devices, okay, good. And Kelly's group, devices starting to move into drugs. Okay, great. We see a lot of device people joining our groups these days. We used to only have drug folks. A lot of the documentation that's out there is for drugs, and it's been adapted by devices. That's because the drug industry was regulated much earlier than devices. The terminology used for devices, however, tends to be a lot more user-friendly. So we want to try to combine both of those today. We'll talk about the drug delivery system. We'll talk about device development system, the basics of that. We're going to talk about the basic principles of good clinical practice. That goes across both. It's exactly the same, whether we're working on drug studies or device studies, in terms of good clinical practice and documentation. If it's not written, it didn't happen. We're going to talk about the basics, then, of clinical trial design and the use of a study protocol. That's the recipe for what we're going to be doing in the study. We'll list some essential standard operating procedures that are needed. This is a generic issue. Your company may have a larger number of SOPs. It may have a lesser number. It's what do you need for what do you do? If you contract many things out, you may not need an SOP for that. In your contract, you're going to document that you're using the SOP of the vendor. We always do need SOPs for the regulatory authorities. If a regulatory authority should inspect your study, either at your location or at one of your sites, they're going to look to see that everyone is trained for the procedure that they're asked to do at all levels. So we need to have SOPs then to show how we trained our staff. How do we do important tasks? And so if you contract a bunch of things out, you may not need an SOP for it, other than an SOP for how do you contract. How do you choose that vendor? And then you would use the SOP of the vendor for the actual procedure. The regulatory authority will check that SOP to see if the company that wrote the SOP actually interpreted the rules appropriately. SOPs are interpretations of the regulation. How are we going to do a task? Does it meet with the regulatory authority's expectation? So that's the purpose for that documentation. We'll talk about the responsibilities then of the various members of the clinical team. We'll look at some of the essential documents that are needed, how to get those documents ready. These are going to support our clinical process. The timeliness of those is extremely important. Timing means money. The quicker we can get a study up and running, the faster we can finish that study, which may mean the faster we could get a new drug application or a pre-market approval submitted to the FDA for marketing rights. Obviously, the faster it can get submitted, the faster we can get it on the market, and the more money we will make as a company.